In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to programmatically add new customers into the customer table of our Acme database in our LocalDB example project. So I am starting from the Lesson 64 Before folder, pretty much exactly where we left off in the previous lesson in Lesson 63. So make sure to copy 64 or have finished up 63 to get to the point where I'm at right now in the project. Just to refresh your memory, we have a presentation layer, a domain layer, and a persistence layer. We also have data transfer objects that will be used by all the layers so that they can communicate a customer up and down throughout the layers. So our objective here is to add functionality in the presentation layer and then begin driving that functionality down through the domain layer and through the persistence layer to create a new spike of functionality in the system. And really the purpose of this is to demonstrate the mechanics of using the entity framework to insert a new entity into a database. You might be wondering, okay, that's great, so now we can read data, we can create data. How about the update and delete scenarios? Admittedly, I could extend this example to include those scenarios as well. I'm choosing not to, at least not at this point, because it would require that we got into into the grid view a little bit deeper, and we would have to the grid view doesn't really accommodate the style of programming that we've been doing in this application up to this point. So we would have to kind of probably chuck it and use a different technique, and I didn't want to get into all that just yet. We're going to talk about these sorts of things in the ASP.NET web form fundamentals and then also the data persistence fundamentals. We'll learn more about all of those update delete scenarios and how to use both the built-in controls and then also how to kind of manually do it ourselves. Alright, so given all those caveats, let's go ahead and get started. The first order of business is I'm going to add form controls to my ASPX page so that I can capture the name, address, city, state, postal code, and notes from the customer. And we'll also add a OK button, and that's when we'll start to begin to touch all of the layers with the add code. So first of all, I've already got some of this already created. I'm just going to copy and paste this, and I encourage you to pause the video and to catch up with me so that I don't have to type everything in for the next 15 minutes here. Alright, so just to kind of do a quick review here, you can pause the video right here and catch up, type this in yourself. We're creating a text box for each of the fields that I know I want to capture about a customer. Name, address, city, state, zip code or postal code, and the notes text box. All in text boxes. ASP server control text boxes. Also, what I'm going to need to do is to add an OK button. So let me go ahead and copy and paste that in as well. And let me move it over here. Great. And what I'll do is add an on-click event equal, and then we'll use the IntelliSense pop-up to create a new event back in the default.aspx.cs page. So I think that's all I have to do there. Let's take a look at the design view just to look at it. Alright, it's ugly, admittedly. Maybe I should add a little bit more spacing in between some of these items. And I think the easiest way to do this, like between the grid view and the beginning of our form, is to add a paragraph tag and then use this special code for a non-breaking space, which would basically force the paragraph to be rendered. Sometimes if you just put an empty paragraph, your web browser will ignore it, but now we've created a non-breaking space character which forces the browsers to observe that paragraph tag. And the paragraph just creates a little bit more space than these regular line breaks that we see defined here. We'll also go ahead and put one between the button and the label. And the only thing we're going to do with the label is just to state that it was saved successfully. And we may not even need that. It just depends on where we go with this. And I'm not sure that these additions made the form all that more attractive, but at least now it's not all scrunched together. So, given that, let's go ahead and what we'll ultimately want to do is make a call from the OK button click event into our domain, which will then make a call into the persistence layer. And so let's start with the persistence layer then, and let's make a change to our customer repository.cs. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to capture some of this here. I'm going to copy those first two lines because I'm probably going to need them again. And I'll do a public static add customer. Actually, this should be a void add customer. And I would expect to be passed in a DTO.customer called customer. I could even call this something like new customer. It might make more sense. In fact, let me go ahead and do that. New customer. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that code in that I copied just a moment ago. This will give me access to the customers collection. In fact, I don't think I need that just yet. What I need to do is to create a new customer, not a DTO customer, but one from the Acme entities code generation result. This one, actually this one here. All right. So what I'll do is go back here. I'm going to do var customer equals new customer. And then we'll just do customer.name. We're going to do pretty much the reverse of what we've done here, where we grabbed customers from the database and put them into the DTO. Now we're grabbing them from the DTO, those values, and putting them into the values for a new instance of the customer from the database. So new customer.name, and we'll just follow this little pattern, customer.address equals new customer.address, customer.city equals new customer.city, customer.state equals new customer.state, whoops, new customer, all one word, state, customer.postal equals new customer.postal, customer.notes equals new customer.notes. All right. And then the next thing that we're going to want to do is to actually commit this to the database. So actually I do want to use this after all, but I'm going to get rid of the to list because I actually want to work with the DB set of customer. And so with the DB set of customer, I'm just going to go DB customers dot add, and you can see I can give it a customer entity, so I should be able to just give it customer. And then finally I'll need to do a db dot save changes, and that will actually commit those changes to the database. So if I never call this, it will be added to the local version of the DB set of customers in memory, but the final step will never be taken to actually write that new customer into the database. And you would use save changes in all the scenarios, whether you're deleting customers or updating customers as well. Okay, so we have the add functionality. It should work. We haven't tested it yet. But before we actually go about implementing this in the other layers, I want to talk about the possibility that a runtime exception occurs. After all, we're relying on the database, and we know that we can lose a connection with the database, or there can be some intermittent error. Who knows? We could also run into a situation where the data has not been validated properly. It makes its way all the way down here to the persistence layer, and it might be missing a piece of information that we know to be a required field in the database. This is our last line of defense before we attempt to execute this query against the database and insert a row. So we should do any validation checks inside of here on the new customer that comes in. And so we would do a series of checks. For example, we know that a name is a required field in the database. So if the customer name, so if customer, if new customer dot name dot trim dot length is equal to 0, then I want to throw a new exception. And here I have some choices to make. Am I going to throw a generic exception back up to the other layer? am I going to let any entity framework exceptions bubble up into the domain layer? I'm not sure I like either of those scenarios. What I want to do is create custom exceptions that can be handled by the domain layer. So I have some choices to make there. If I'm going to create a custom exception, where do I define those? Eventually, I'll probably recommend that you define them in the domain layer. It's not readily obvious at this point, but remember we said that all the dependencies should be pointing away. Actually, the dependencies should be pointing towards our domain layer. So the persistence layer should rely on the domain layer, just like the presentation layer relies on the domain layer. So we can define things in the domain layer and then they'd be available to the persistence layer. We don't really have that here, so it'd be a little bit difficult to implement that. Another option is to implement custom exceptions in something like the DTO project, or to actually create a new project for a local DB example .custom exceptions that could be shared across all the layers, or at least between persistence and the domain layer. For now, I'm not going to do all those sorts of things. I'm going to keep this pretty tidy, but keep in mind that that's something we could do and probably should do. But those are issues that I'll address in the application architecture fundamentals and that whole series of courses wrapped around architecture. So we'll just say here that name is a required field. And we might perform other validation here. Then we probably want to wrap some try-catch around save changes, or actually let's go ahead and put it around both of these lines of code. So let's do try tab, and here we'll try that. And now what do we do with the exception? Well, we definitely want to log the exception if this were a real example using log4net or some custom exception handling cross-cutting concern library that we create or that we use from a third party. What do we do here now, though? That is the question. Here again, I would probably create a custom exception, swallow the natural exception that happens from the entity framework. I don't want anything about specifically the entity framework bubbling up into my domain layer. It should have no knowledge. I don't want that leaky abstraction. I want to contain everything about the entity framework inside of persistence. But I do need to communicate back that there was a problem with whatever data storage mechanism that we choose to use. I wanted to communicate that back up, that that was the problem as opposed to some other issue. Here again, I would want to create a custom exception. I might create it in the domain layer, but our architecture as it currently stands has the dependencies pointed in the wrong direction. So here again, I could choose to put it in the DTO. I could choose to create another project for custom exceptions, or I could just do this, which is kind of the cheater's way. I'll just take it and then rethrow it, knowing that at some point I would want to come back and address this, because this isn't exactly what I had in mind. Long term, it's not going to be the most expressive to say that there was this specific type of problem so that the domain layer can decide what to do next, whether retry or to communicate something back to the end user. So we'll just leave it at this for now. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is to go up to the domain layer. Oh, actually, let me build this since we've made some changes here, and there is a need to access that change from our customer manager class in our domain layer. So go public static void add customer, and here I would expect a DTO.customer called customer to be passed in from the presentation layer. Now I could make this interface more chatty and just let it pass in the name as a parameter, the address as a parameter, and so on. That might be the right way to go about this, just so that we're not overusing the DTO, but I don't care. I think this is just fine. We've already exposed that DTO customer to the presentation layer. Why shouldn't it know how to create a new one and then pass it into our domain layer? So really here all we're going to do is just take that customer and pass it on to the persistence layer. So we're going to go persistence.customer repository add customer and then pass in the customer. And you might say this seems like an unnecessary step. Yes, again, for a small application where we're simply doing create, read, update, delete style operations, the domain layer will have very little to do. However, when we write applications that have more expressive logic requirements, we would need to have this layer. You might choose to leave out a domain layer completely. Many people choose to do that. You may not need a domain. Just go straight from presentation to persistence. That would be okay. Just make sure that you don't allow any leakiness from that persistence up to the presentation layer. And the way to keep that in mind is, would I be able to exchange out this presentation layer with a new one and not have any dependencies on the entity framework in my presentation layer? All right, so that's all that we should need to do there. Let's go on now to our default.aspxcs. In the OK button click event, what we want to do is grab off or create a new customer, a new DTO customer. So var new customer equals new DTO customer, and then I'm going to paste in the code because I don't want to type all this out in order to fill up the properties of this new customer. So you can see here, well, I called it something different for my notes, postal code. Okay, there we go. All right, so there we go. That should work. We've captured all of the values, name, address, city, state, postal code, and notes. And then notice also that I'm just going to go ahead and create a new GUID right here and assign that as the customer ID. I know that in the database we can go ahead and let it automatically create that GUID for us. Either way is fine. Finally, I'm going to make a call into the domain layer. So domain.customermanager.add customer, passing in this DTO customer. So new customer, like that. Now here again, I probably want to perform a try catch around this. And whenever I'm making a call into another layer, that's probably a good idea, especially when that layer, we know that it's going to do some data access. And that reminds me, I probably should go here and do the same thing. So try, all right, and here we should log it or whatever, maybe modify it in some way before we pass it on to the presentation layer. But if there is an exception on the presentation layer, then we're going to go ahead and not throw it. This time we're going to actually display it to the end user. So the result label, don't we have a result label on this thing? Oh, I'm in the repository. Whoops, wrong spot. It's easy to get confused with all this code that looks similar. Did I make a mistake here? Yeah, let's throw ex. Get here and go result label.text equals, we're going to capture the exception and then display it ex.message. All right, not the way that I would create a production quality application. I would want to give this a little bit more thought, use custom errors, implement logging, but I want to save time for now and just demonstrate the basics of how to save an entity into a database. So let's go ahead and run the application. I think we're still missing one step even with this. Okay, so you can see that we still have our one record. Let's go and add in Steve at 456 Elm, Dallas, Texas, 70450, and this is my first attempt. And click Save Data. Okay, and nothing seemed to happen. The reason is because I haven't refreshed the grid. Now, if I were to stop this and then restart the application, it should show up. Okay, and it did. Interestingly, though, I think our customer ID has an issue. That didn't seem to be what I would have expected there. let me take a look at the customer's repository, make sure that I'm capturing it. Okay, therein lies the problem. I didn't actually capture it here. So customer ID equals new customer dot customer ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this one more time and then make one other change. Notice that when we ran it and we saved the record, it did save, but it didn't refresh the page. So the last thing that we need to do here before we pop out of this is actually do the same refresh. Now I might take this and put it into its own little private helper method. In fact, let me go ahead and do that. Private void, let's just call this display customers, and all it will do is just that. So then we can call display customers, and we'll call it from here as well. Alright, and that should work. Let's go ahead, save the application, and then run it again. Let's add another user. Let's add Richard. This time, Richard. So, way out in the boonies. He lives far away. Let's go ahead and save the data. All right, and this time it looks like it worked correctly, the way that we would anticipate it to. Now I do want to point out one thing. Notice that there's no rhyme or reason to the sorting of these records as they're brought back. They're not necessarily in alphabetical order, and so we could modify how our application works. Let's go back to the customer repository, and here what I want to do is I'm going to actually do a sort. And to do that, I'm going to call a helper method called order by. And then I'm going to do something that looks really crazy here, so just stick with me. Okay, now what I just created here is a lambda expression. And this is something that you'll learn more about when you learn about LINQ. It's basically a tiny method. And this one little method, all it will do is perform a sorting or an ordering by the name of the customer. So this is, the letter P represents the customer because we're working with a list of customers or a DB set of customers. So given any customer, order by the customer's name is what it basically says. Again, there's a lot more to learn about LINQ, whether you use it in the entity framework or LINQ to objects or LINQ to SQL or any of the strains of LINQ that are available out there. We have an entire series about LINQ available for you as well on learnvisualstudio.net. So let's go ahead and save this now, and let's see if we actually get an ordered list of customers. All right, and this time we get Bob, Richard, Steve. So that seems to be in the correct order there. Okay. So again, not a fully fleshed out example. However, we did two basic things. The most important thing in this example was that we learned how to actually perform a save by creating an instance of an entity and then adding it to the DB set of customer and then calling our context.saveChanges method in order to force that new customer to be saved, that new customer entity to be saved in the customers table of our database. But we also learned about and talked about the issues around throwing exceptions between our various layers. We talked about using LINQ to entities, in this case, to actually order the values that are being brought back. We talked about issues surrounding how to refresh after we did a save and a few other things as well. So hopefully this has been a beneficial topic as we're moving towards our next big example or big project that we're going to work on. Okay, so just one more topic, and it's a fun topic. It's going to be how do we deploy this out to Azure so that the world can see it. And we'll do that in the very next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks.